top of the hour, and I think it's fair to get started for those that are on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my presentation, and we're going to do some basic introductions to our guest speakers, and we'll get started. So thanks for everyone's attendance, and I'm excited to have you here, and a really cool, fun, and exciting topic. We will be talking about digital twin technology, specifically with Visual Plan, and looking at real-time analytical data, so actual data that we can use to take action on various equipment and faults that need to be remedied quickly. So introduction to myself, my name is Kelly Watt. I'm the CEO of Visual Plan. Visual Plan is a software company that sells, supports, and does project work to implement digital twins into organizations to make operational changes. Kelly Stewart, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much, Kelly. Kelly Stewart, President and CEO. I know it says Managing Director, but President and CEO of Newcastle Consulting. Been in this field of technology, physical security, and cybersecurity and whatnot for about 30 years with various entities, both public and private, and vast array of knowledge, vast array of design and technical experience in terms of what we're going to discuss, what we're going to go through today. So look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. And Steve, a few words about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Crow. I'm part of the integration team here at Resolute Building Intelligence, as well as part of the sales team. I come from a commercial building management background, where I experienced a lot of the difficulties and pains that people deal with in that space, especially the facilities teams. And part of what I want to do here today is start teaching people how easy it is to turn their teams into data analysts and make them more effective within day-to-day operations.
Very cool. We're excited to hear about it. So I think we're going to kind of start the webinar with a particular topic that I think everyone can agree to, and that is that buildings are becoming more and more complex given technology and new construction, and also the fact that a lot of existing buildings have very limited information in them. We struggle with that. And that organizations in general are struggling just to maintain these facilities and the knowledge that we have about these facilities when we have the workforce changeovers. And that's a really painful moment when we have someone that's critical to an organization leave and all that knowledge walks out the door with them potentially. And we're also needing to do more with less today in terms of less resources or fewer people. So how do we do that with increased responsibilities and possibly leveraging technology to do that more efficiently? So I want to kind of get started through this concept of a question that we can ask ourselves that, are we operating blind? And what does that mean? Well, I think each of us is going to talk how it means to us in our companies. But, from my perspective, it's more going to be a visual, do we see it? But can you talk to this point, Steve, and what does operating blind mean to you from an analytics and fault and diagnosis perspective?
Yeah, the operating blind being a little bit of a cliche reminds me kind of another cliche that I think helps it apply really to data. And that's kind of that theory that if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you're more or less operating in a blind state. So from my perspective, it's really a component of making decisions based on historical data or the lack thereof, and operating based on rhetoric and opinion is kind of my version of operating blind within a building's infrastructure.
I think that's a great analogy. I really like that too. And I think it very much resonates for us for digital twins, meaning that we're going to have visual information. The visual information can be 360 imagery, it can be LiDAR, it can be 2D CAD drawings and all the attribute information. But when we have someone, service tech comes into a building blind, what we're saying is that they don't even know where the assets are. So, opening doors, searching for assets, not having information, trying to find it on nameplates, not having the right tools, not being prepared. And that does cause a lot of pain in organizations. Kelly Stewart, from a security, safety, health perspective, what does operating blind mean to you, and what are the implications here?
Well, and I think you touched upon it briefly, but what we look at whenever I'm going through an assessment or consulting with a client is operational effectiveness. And how do we look at and I give prime example in terms of retail space right now that is being looted, as well as then their employees are also being accosted. How do we deal with that? What kind of problem? How do we diagnose that, like it says here, properly? How do we prepare for those things is kind of where we go into the planning stages. And what does that look like? Operating in the blind for us when we're advising folks is just not knowing your environment properly, and us teaching them how to understand and how to be more self-aware, as well as aware of what is going on with the environment that they're working in, so that they do have, operational effectiveness, and then they keep themselves safe and secure when they're doing so.
Right. Yeah, and that definitely pertains to the assets within the buildings, which can be a number of things beyond physical assets, but people, property, IP, and other things, and the implications those have if we're not putting in policies to protect those. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So let's kind of give a visual example of a current way that we deal with data from our perspective. And I think Kelly also sees this a lot. So when we're approaching a new project, oftentimes we're getting very limited information. There's a lot of gaps in the information that we get. And CAD drawings are one of the things I think we all struggle with. Getting something current as-built is nearly impossible because it's never accurate. Even at the date that it's commissioned and sent out the door, the very next day it becomes less and less accurate. We might be fortunate enough to get some site photographs, or may need to go to site to take photographs, or maybe leaving with some paper drawings that we're scanning. So very limited information, trying to gather that, and it's fragmented too. It's in different locations with different people. And to fill the gaps between what we do see and what we have to speculate on, there's a lot of conversations. So I'm verifying by having conversations with people that are giving me information. I can't really validate. I mean, they're telling me, but I don't know for sure. So a lot of mistrust in the information means that we need to go to site, we need to verify, validate, resurvey. And it's a very redundant exercise that's costing a lot of us a lot of time and a lot of energy. And it also hurts the carbon footprint, which we've been talking about, Steve, recently. It's one thing to be building efficient, but what else about being operationally efficient with how we look at the environment, correct?
100%. I mean, the efficiency has to go beyond just what you're dealing with as far as KWHs and things like that. You need to start looking at where that power is being sourced from, all kinds of different things, because it's all going to play an impact in your sustainability goals, which are goals that everybody's coming up with now, and it's not a bad thing.
That's absolutely. So where we want to be at is kind of looking towards having full 360 visualization. It's just a screenshot from our dashboard. Have a 3D model if they're available, having accurate drawings and attribute information, all the make, model, serial number, all that rich data that we're always searching to have. And the cool thing about 3D is just the way we can access that information by walking in, looking and touching to find that information, as opposed to what data is really typically organized in folders, right? And as humans, we're not really comfortable with accessing information effectively when it's layers and layers of data. We have to search for it, right? And this also is a conversation about integration and interoperability, because this data may already exist in a CMMS system. Or in the case for Resolute, the risk scoring and that kind of valuable real-time information is here, and other data is over here. So how can we take these data silos and kind of break those down and get into a place where data becomes accessible and operational? And I think that's what a digital twin is really all about. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings of what the term means, and it's a relatively new term, but the process has been around for a while. And it is a visual representation, a building information model or a 360 tool or something like that. But it's much beyond that, because we have to look at processes. We have to look at updating this information. It has to be a living thing. It has to include the historical data and the new data. And that's really critical for us to do good decision and good critical thinking to get to best outcomes. And when we implement a digital twin strategy, there's a use case, there's a reason why, and it's for certain individuals that at least they start, and hopefully it grows to be used through an organization. But we've got to think about how and why we're creating this, and how it's going to be used effectively, because there are different ways we can approach it, and there are different tools to do the job. So picking the right tool to do the job is going to be dictated based on the use cases. So Steve, talk to me a little bit about language, and how important language and how we communicate through our organization is both important, but also can cause a lot of issues within an organization.
A ton of issues. And you already said kind of one of the key words to this, which is the word silo. And I'll touch on that as I kind of go over this slide, but I liked the whole are you operating blind statement. It's real. I think it's something that people can understand. So I wanted to tie my component into the, are you speaking the same language? And I mean this in regards to within a building's infrastructure. And so represented here on the picture, what we have is a number of icons for people. The bottom left there is showing the facility technician. If we look at the next group that's represented here, we're going to see that we have above the facility technician, they're usually supported by a facility director. This is also the level that you'll see like a safety director and a security director. When we move away from that, we're getting into another role that we're seeing become a lot more prevalent within buildings, and that's engineers. A lot of engineers are being contracted now to go into buildings and find ways to attain the sustainability goals for the building owners, which is actually our next person on the slide there. And that's going to be your C-suite level individuals or your building owners. So the last component within the building infrastructure, or the last role that almost doesn't seem like it's really part of a facilities team, is the building tenant, up at the top of the list there. And I'm going to kind of circle through briefly with each one and talk a little bit about where communication negatively impacts them. And then I'm going to go through once more and kind of indicate a little bit about where they need some help and how they can get help. So with the facility technician, and the reason that we have it represented with the tin can and all the strings is, if you're a facility technician in a building and you have these other representatives in that same building, that means that you probably have 4 to 5 bosses, maybe 6 or 7 bosses. And you're going to be getting conflicting orders and conflicting instructions from each of them. You're going to have an engineer telling you not to close a damper because it's going to negatively impact some savings. And then you're going to have a tenant in that same place telling you that they're too hot. And the only way that you can think to improve the conditions is to close that damper. Now, when we move up to the facility director or the safety and security directors, these people typically know the most about what's going on within the day-to-day of a building. In my experience within buildings, when you're looking at or talking to a facility director, they're talking to pretty much everybody else involved within facilities. And they have a ton of information in their head, but it's in their head. And there's not a really effective, easy way to disseminate that information to the interested parties effectively. Now, the engineers kind of moving on with the problems that they deal with as a result of all this stuff is they're going to come in and be tasked with finding savings or finding things along those lines, and they're going to have things that they want to see implemented. Well, then they're beholden to those facilities teams to keep those implementations without the facilities team necessarily having the same goal, where the goal for the engineer might be to provide some improved carbon usage. If that improvement on the carbon usage negatively impacts the comfort, then that facilities technician is going to more or less eliminate that engineer's ability to complete their job, and they probably won't even be aware of it. And then when you get down to the facility owner, they're expected to spend a lot of money. They're expected to take very little information on systems that they typically don't understand and make expensive financial decisions about the future of those things. And then finally, the tenants and the security guards, these are the #1 dispatchers within buildings when it comes to problems. It is not a system. It is not a series of alarms. It's none of that. It's people walking around the buildings and saying, wow, it feels too hot, or it feels too cold, or it's super humid, or there's water leaking. And we rely on them to be kind of the primary dispatchers of when there's problems within the building. And that's not correct. So kind of a quick circle back through, facilities technicians need help. They need to have a single boss. At least they need to have a single set of directions that include kind of everybody's goals. The facility director and the safety administrator and directors, they need help to be able to effectively get all of the stuff that's in their brain out to people that need to understand it in a more simplified way. Your engineers, they need data. They need access to data, and then they need access to the facilities teams to be able to share the results of the data and how they want to utilize the building's operational systems to improve whatever it is they're looking to improve in a way that's not going to negatively impact those facility technician jobs. The facility owner, they need a much easier way to understand their capital spend. If they're being told that they have to spend $200,000 to $300,000 on an air handler or chiller replacement, they need an easier way for you to explain to them how critical this investment is, why it's necessary, and then what the results are once it's done. And then kind of finally, the tenant and the guards, they need their days back. Their jobs are not meant to be there as facilities team dispatchers. They are meant to be there completing their projects. And we kind of get away in the way of that with the way things happen now. And with all of these efforts being siloed, you wind up with this jumbled up set of communication where nobody really knows what the other person is doing or what the other group is doing. And they just create a lot of conflicting problems with each other. And I feel like Kelly Stewart, you've probably run into situations in your past where you've probably witnessed things like this, where you've wanted to have certain things implemented for safety or security that tenants or facilities teams have told you are not, not viable.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. It's a matter, again, I'm going to emphasize forward situational awareness as well as operational effectiveness. It goes into, okay, what do we do in a situation? How do we do it effectively? What are we going to do when these things do happen? And how can we plan accordingly? So you touched upon this whole aspect and notion of just understanding what to do. And I think the question's appropriately stated. Are you speaking the same language? It goes into, is there a level of understanding with each one of the components within a facility that they know and understand, at least on a base level? What does each department do? What are they aware of? What do they need to know? And know it in such a way where they understand they're all on the same sheet of music. And you can do that with the current technology that allows you to expand on, how do you understand the facility and how do you understand a certain process that you have to do?
I think there's another interesting angle on this too. When we're talking about speaking the same language, it's consistency in how we communicate that information too, without attitudes, without job security, filtering this type of messaging, right? And I think, when we talk about visualization, and that can be from the analytics side or from the digital twin side, we're cutting across personalities and attitudes and giving raw, accurate information. And it's still up for the humans to take action or not take action on that information, but everyone gets to look at the same, as Kelly Stewart said, the same sheet of music or the same scoreboard. So I really like that kind of analogy so that organizations can become consistent with how they communicate and using tools to do that effectively. So
Yeah.
Going back to Steve here, let's talk about that information and how powerful it is if we have consistent information.
So I wanted to kind of, again, correlate this back to something that's real world for people and make it something that they can kind of translate into their everyday, because a lot of this stuff we're already doing it on our day-to-day and we're just not doing it within this industry. And this next slide with the Just Google on top there, when I think about the biggest communication tool, the most effective communication tool that's probably been invented in the history of man, it's the internet. And one of the things that the last slide really drives at is how difficult communication is within a building's infrastructure. So we want to create that internet, that source of truth, that source of data within a building's infrastructure. And that internet is not effective on its own. I like to think of the internet as almost being like just a BAS, where if you know how to effectively put in the URL, you know exactly what you're looking for, you can find it. But 99.9% of us needs the help of something like a search engine, like Google. And there's no reason why with something like a Google or within my building, I couldn't start interrogating my system and asking it relatively simple questions like the one I have listed here, saying just, is my building healthy? And then if we ask that question, can we get things to populate that will give us an answer to that? And so we're going to show here, if you wouldn't mind clicking on the next flip up there. We might not get a direct answer back of yes, your building is healthy, or no, your building is unhealthy, but we can get provided back with all the metrics around that allow us to make an educated decision or an educated understanding to that question. And I think that that's really important, because we need to create a system where anybody within a building's infrastructure can interrogate and ask simple questions of a system and get those simple answers back without any of the personality that Kelly mentioned before, and without any fear of any kind of pushback from any personality, where people just know this is data, this is a source of truth. And if we use this to leverage, it's going to help us to start removing some of the things that we've been doing in the past around a part changer mentality of, instead of interrogating a system, we go out and change a part, and starting to drive us towards some better root cause analysis towards the goals that we find important.
Yeah, and I love that kind of part changer mentality, and then thinking about that a little bit more. You know, we're changing parts because we don't really know what the problem is, and we don't have accurate information to be able to make those decisions to properly dig into the root cause. You know, a couple of things come to mind to me. I used to live in Thailand. If I asked for directions, I would always get an answer, but it was a cultural thing. People give me an answer, I would never get the right answer. I would get 3 answers, and I would even be more lost before I start. Likewise, you're at a Thanksgiving dinner. We just had Thanksgiving, and there's a dispute, and we're sitting arguing over a point. Well, we don't need to anymore, because we have methods to get that information. We have GPS to find where we're going, and we have the internet to be able to validate information from. So again, I think, you know, having that kind of information at your fingertips to make quick decisions, and even Steve, we did that the other day. We're looking at the mechanical room, and you were asking me what kind of bath system it is. I have no idea. I'll have to chase down the facility manager. But I was like, wait a second, let me just walk in, I'll pull open the doors, and we looked at it, and we read it. We had that information within just a few seconds, right?
Oh, and that one experience for me meant hours in my career as a building manager, because those are the types of questions that take some time. And so in this next slide, you know, again, trying to keep everything real so that way people can kind of make a nice correlation to their own lives, or to something that they have some experience with. We want people to become Netflix, not Blockbuster. Really, that means we want future, not past. So the past is rolling out a truck to identify problems and resolutions. We want people to review data, visualizations, and reporting to proactively address those areas that are going to be problematic. An old way of doing things from like a facility manager point of view is you're going to try your best to communicate via emails and calls to get your brain into other people. But the new way is to use a centralized database that's going to allow things to be understood by everyone within a building, so you can help understand current and past performance. Another kind of antiquated way that I think most buildings still do is, when a problem happens, you run around gathering opinions and guessing. So that's their first step in troubleshooting. And this problem was probably brought to you by a tenant. A new, more improved way is having that data and the facts to help determine the operational improvements that are going to make sure we align everybody for collective agreement on critical investments and how we need to react. And what I mean by collectively is that, again, if I go back to that example with the engineer, where we're not telling an engineer, hey, your goal is to improve sustainability, and that goal is going to negatively impact comfort without the facility team being aware of it. So we need to have all of these goals aligned and placed into some kind of centralized system to where we can see those impacts that our activities are having on all the goals within a building.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Kelly, talk to us a little bit more, like, let's dig into this topic and what situational awareness means to an organization.
So let's take it. Why do we want situational awareness? What is the purpose for what has been said thus far in terms of operating effectively, as well as you understanding your environment? The whole point of this is to make sure you get the information as fast as you can, as accurately as you can, and then to be able to make the right decision as quick as possible. Now, that's where it comes into what is real-time situational awareness. Well, it's using these tools in such a fashion that you get that response or that detection immediately, and you're able to act upon it in a concise, succinct, and proper fashion. So again, it goes back to that whole thing on what I mentioned on operational effectiveness. So you're making real decisions in real time. You're accessing real-time analysis and analytics so that you can properly inform either those that you're responsible for, or allow those folks in those certain departments to make a decision quickly and on the spot. Now, what does that do for you? If it's a situation where you're, say, in a retail environment and people are looting your store, or your employees are getting assaulted, you're able to make that decision as to, okay, do we send 911? Are we able to respond to these certain situations quickly and responsibly, and be able to take necessary action given the data and stuff that we're seeing?
And from an emergency perspective, Kelly, like, you know, failing equipment, could cause damage, fire, flood, and many other things too, couldn't it?
Well, and that's what I was going to get into. When you're looking at the whole systematic piece of this, fire as well as security, you're looking, does everything work properly? Is it working the way it should work? And if it's not, considering we have the digital twin as well as some of the other technology, what does that allow us to do? That allows us to probably fix it and get to that type of problem a lot quicker and a lot faster than we did it before. So what the whole thing here is, don't act reactively, try to act more proactively.
And Kelly Stewart, it reminds me of what Kelly Watt, what you were dealing with out in your neck of the woods a couple weeks ago with the flooding that was going on. And just like you're saying, Kelly Stewart, it's you know, a sump pump checkup doesn't seem that important until it becomes a $100,000 flood repair.
Well, exactly. The example I always use with a lot of folks when we're making these type of presentations is, just imagine if you're in the hospitality and the major crux to your business is laundry, and everybody kind of has a question mark in the head. Why would it be laundry? Well, the hospitality business and hotel business is incumbent upon clean sheets on beds. People have to go to sleep. People have to get to the rooms. If that portion of that operation shuts down, then the entire thing is gone and lost. And people aren't going to be happy. Guests aren't going to be happy. And you've essentially lost your business. So knowing and understanding how that is and what you do with it, like to your example with the flooding, and being able to plan properly is huge. Huge, not only from return on investment, but also, you know, how you plan into the future.
Yeah, I think it's different use cases too, right? I mean, if you go into the healthcare market and have a hospital, what is the comfort, heat, clean air? These types of things become critical. People could die if these systems fail. So, I think, what Kelly does from a business process perspective is go through all of that critical thinking to understand those operational processes. Never thought laundry would be so important, but when you think about it, you're not going to have people sleeping in beds without it. Likewise with building, HVAC and plumbing, these buildings can't perform and they can't host people safely and securely if they're not operating efficiently.
Well, exactly. Go ahead to the next slide.
Yep.
So what I wanted to talk on, what this slide is all about, is what is that aspect of risk, threat, and vulnerability assessment. So as a profession, what I do is I go and assess operations. I assess what they're doing, and apologize for it doing this. But what exactly occurs? What are the risks to the business? So for the facility aspect, okay, how does my facility operate properly? What do I need to know about it to ensure that nothing is at risk and nothing will affect the tenants or the folks that are inside of it? And how do I get to know and understand that effectively, properly? And how do I identify these things? So you go through a certain process of identifying your asset, characterizing what they are, seeing what kind of threats are associated with either the building or with each element within that building. And then how do I effectively take care of that and mitigate that risk? And then from that, if you go to the next slide, Kelly. Done that, you go into a systematic approach, because you want to see the whole entire picture once you've done all this data gathering and all this understanding of what's in your facility. What do I have to be aware of? How do I understand this properly? So then I can interpolate that to good information that I can communicate to not only the people that work for me, but also the people I work for, which could be either the client or your bosses. So
Kelly,
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Kelly, so I was just going to mention, I love this graphic because the people attending the webinar wouldn't know this, but we didn't coordinate our slides at all. And I like the fact that I bring up a problem being all this mismanaged communication and people not working together. And one of your biggest components to your solution is that systematic approach and showing everybody meeting together.
Right. Nail on the head. I mean, that's the whole thing. All this doesn't mean anything unless there's proper communication, proper collaboration. The whole point of it is to be resilient and also at the end of the day, be profitable. Because remember, we're all running businesses. Yes, we're looking at a facility point of view, but we're looking at how do we properly run that business so we make money. I mean, I hate to draw it down to that. You're looking at safety and security, but you're also looking at how's your business going to, exist into the future.
Well, it's a consideration, Kelly, that as much as I hate the term ROI, it's something that has to be made because people have to validate. And like you said, everybody is still running a business.
Exactly.
So, I think one of the statements that we can say is kind of bringing into this whole concept of digital twins again, is that, we can reduce that touch point. We can reduce that travel back and forth because we have that kind of intelligence. We have the information at our fingertips. We can validate that information through a system like what Steve's company does at Resolute. And then we can precisely go and attend to that or communicate who needs to attend to it rather than have a number of people in the room. Actually, a really interesting project I was putting together for AECOM just yesterday, one of our bigger customers. And I was looking at how many field inspectors were there. And I swear there was probably 20 people in the yellow vests and the orange vests. And we see this because there's 360 pictures being taken. And I was like, wow, how many people, how many hours, how much time and how much resources are being sucked up on this field inspection right now. And then at the end of that inspection, how much is that retained, right? How do we collect that information and then put it somewhere so that we can all access it in the future? But that was a really interesting thing that I was working on that project and just seeing that a number of people on site walking through in a major site, multiple buildings, huge area.
Well, and Kelly, you would probably consider that with regards to, all these people are being paid to do this, but then that also, it does have an impact on the environment because everybody took some kind of form of transportation to get there.
There's a carbon aspect. There's also a risk aspect to these sites that there may be a health and safety or even a security threat to have someone on site that shouldn't be on site. Right.
Well, and it's interesting that you say it that way because I just heard recently they came out with a report for the most dangerous jobs in America, and the most dangerous jobs focus around driving. So there's actually an additional component of even just that drive to the site puts you in additional risk.
100%, absolutely. So if we're organizations that we're looking to reduce risk, both internally and externally with how we move forward, I think that it's a good point. So this is a dashboard showing the digital twin from our software. This project actually was something we worked on with a really valuable partner of ours in the Lower Mainland, Kickstart Technologies. And this is their client, the city of Coquitlam. And we're working with actually a lot of different municipalities through Kickstart. They've been a great company. They do a lot of LiDAR, BIM, CAD work, 30 years working with a lot of these businesses. So they got a lot of trust with them. So it's been really nice to work with them to bring in new technology in the door. And what we were discussing initially with the city is just the lack of information, even in their CMMS software, which they were using IBM Maximo, and talking to their finance people, even understanding information at an asset level or at the equipment level, because sometimes in facilities we think an asset is a building and a building alone, and we have cost centers that may be all the pumps, not just one pump. So it causes a lot of confusion, and we don't have anything to visually see other than spreadsheets and numbers. So it was really cool to get into these Zoom meetings and expose different areas of these facilities, sometimes for the first time, to people that have worked there 20 years or 10 years. And they're seeing and interacting with the environment. It was really telling to us that we were going the right direction and doing something important. So you can see on the left-hand side, the control ID being the Maximo asset ID is what they're used to identify a particular asset. Specific description information, the tagging system that's used, make, model, serial number, and then a link specifically to the work order system. So if I'm sitting here and I get some type of issue detected from Resolute, now I can go and click to find this directly from their dashboard with a quick click. Now I'm at the pump level and I can inspect the pump. I can inspect the environment because sometimes environment can be a big contributor to what the issue might be. And then I have all the information about the particular asset or assets I may need to troubleshoot with. And that can even include videos that we tag to the tours to help with troubleshooting, warranties, all of this kind of information at your fingertips. So now we do hopefully one trip, solve the problem and leave, and we don't have trucks going back and forth. And the other aspect of this is reducing the downtime. You know, if we're in the middle of winter and we lose heat, how does that affect, you know, our tenants, our people, and especially in that healthcare example, how does it affect a critical facility like that? So taking you in the door, this is kind of the experience. And it's an experience that we all kind of are familiar with. It's very much like a Google Street View. And we can basically, I did a training, I just handed over a stadium project today. I did a maybe 15, 20-minute training with the security and the police officers on how to navigate an entire stadium. And they're picking up and immediately using that visual information in their business process and in their decision process in preparation for the Grey Cup Stadium that's happening in 12 days. So as you're seeing here, our assets are tagged, we have our information at our fingertips, we can navigate through a multi-floor building, access the critical information that we need to be able to you know, do the analysis and to prepare and plan the response before we get on site. And that includes things that are in difficult to reach areas. I don't have to hunt and find assets. I don't have to unlock multiple doors and to travel throughout a building to try to find something. Or guess that, is this the right boiler? Because we don't have proper asset tagging physically on the assets. And that's more common than I would have ever thought. I was doing a project with Georgia Tech just about last month, and the differences from the documentation of the fire equipment and the electrical equipment and the MEP equipment was vastly different. And it was really interesting on some of the MEP equipment. I was just shocked that, you know, how do we do our job? How do we even know which air handler we're dealing with, right? And even having these operator manuals at your fingertips is really, really critical. But even more than having a place to log in is to be able to have a tag with maybe a QR code like this, where if I'm on site, I can hit that with my phone, immediately get my asset information, my troubleshooting videos, all of that rich data that I would need to prepare my response or to troubleshoot. And then what we're doing a lot of right now is getting and taking that 3-ring binder that's on the operator's desk and all those policies and procedures or training materials and trying to make that more interactive, more accessible, more local to a specific location, building, asset, and room. So in this case, in the Coquitlam Aquatic Center, we have our facility manager here showing a very simple process of changing a hair trap, a filter. And we communicate as humans so much better when we see things. That's why our law enforcement does training in person so that we have that experience, right? So experiential learning is so valuable. So using visual tools like this, whether it be in a meeting like we're talking right now, whether it be something as a reference material we pull up when we have an issue, or whether we're looking at an onboarding strategy to maintain this knowledge. And that's exactly what we're doing here, is finding a format to maintain knowledge in a centralized location and to be able to share. That knowledge transfer is really critical. So when we look at operational data from our perspective, the asset identification is critical. And that identification information can be in various locations. I'm working with Mohawk College right now on a project, and we have about 922 assets in their Delta controls. And we have other types of assets. So just really trying to figure out, well, where are all our assets? Which ones do we want to track? And where's all that attribute information? So we get a little bit from there. And then I'll talk to ESI automation so I can get more information from there. And then we got to dig into the CMS and just start to kind of get this information formatted in a way that's way more accessible. And that includes the location and the support documentation, the drawings, the CAD, the BIM, whatever we have available. It's really a shame when we have a new construction commission and all these beautiful deliverables get dumped on a desktop with an engineer, and they don't go anywhere. They collect dust. They don't get shared. And this happens to me all the time. I don't know how many times, actually, Kelly, the big hotel project we did 3 years ago, couldn't get a CAD drawing, get on site. The reason was they had 2,300 CAD drawings and they didn't know what to share. You know, it happened to me in the city of New West not too long ago. Couldn't get the right drawing sat down. Everything was there, but it was just too exhaustive of a process for the facility manager to sift through all that data and those folders and find that particular piece of information to share it with that person. Why? Because 50, 60, 70% of their day is responding to these types of same requests. And they're answering the same questions over and over and over to different people. How many times do they pass that floor plan? And it's really unfair to take someone like that and take half of their entire day and consume it with redundant activities when it just doesn't need to be done. What does this operational data mean to you, Steve?
Before I jump into that component, I always like to reference back to that training video, because I go back to my management days, and there's so many things that we would do on a daily basis that if I did not have to reiterate that training, it'd just be great. But when it comes down to the operational data, there's a certain expectation to get certain results, and the expectation is going to be real-time data. If we can get real-time data into a software tool like our Resolute Analytics tool, it's going to allow us the abilities to do things like validation, constant commissioning. It's going to give us certain data visualization tools. We're going to have an expectation of getting system reports where we can ask questions about different components of the building, like when I asked that question of, is the building healthy? We always want to look for interoperability when we're looking at these types of devices. Kelly touched on that earlier, and the reason why is coming up kind of in this next component around the proactive repair strategies, but really the interoperability is important because of the final step of the troubleshoot, plan, respond, and repair. If you can have interoperability between things like an FDD from Resolute and a visual plan digital twin, that's going to allow us to do kind of a new method for operating in buildings where data will indicate where service is needed. And we're going to combine that information with the digital twin asset location and other information that's available on there to allow for minimal site time and far fewer multi-attempts at repair efforts. I know that that's going to be one of the things that drives everybody crazy because it's so common. Most people would love to have that ability to feel confident that when they deploy their technician, they're going to come back with that repair made the first time.
Yeah, I think that's the goal, right? And I think we can get there. And I think one of the coolest things about visualization, whether it be analytical data that we're consuming or whether it be visual digital twins, is that it's remote and that we can rely on other subject matter experts to give their field knowledge. Someone like Kelly Stewart that has such a vast security and risk knowledge could come in and take a quick look at something and visually inspect and give some really good feedback immediately. Someone like from your team, Steve, and you've got services division that knows the stuff inside and out. And when you look at performance and you help to coach and to make these customers you're successful independently, but you can also provide that oversight without having to drive down to the building again, correct?
Well, actually, in the next example, when we get to it, we're going to see a perfect place where had we had our two technologies working together, it actually would have saved us a trip. But what can digital information offer us, and how can I paint that picture out to give a little better understanding of how this helps? So in the example on the right, you're seeing one of the reports that we have available around air handling unit operations. It's clearly indicated through the red indicator that it's a poorly operating device. And so the value of this type of thing is that we can look at not one, but we can look at 10, and we can look at it for not just this snapshot of right now, but we're looking at this from probably about a week time frame. So we get that one that's indicating poor performance, and we dive in a little bit more because data is all about diving in and kind of drilling down into rabbit holes. What we saw as a result of the poor report is that we had a lot of hunting. For anybody that doesn't realize or know what hunting is, think about your furnace turning on and off constantly to keep your heat going. You don't want things slamming open and closed or turning on and off rapidly. And in the data world, especially data visualizations, squiggly lines are a bad thing. So what does it kind of mean? Because there's an initial stab where most people are going to assume, if they have a little bit of knowledge around this arena, that this needs to be retuned by the controls contractor. So they might call that controls contractor and have them come out and retune that. But there's a lot more going on here, and the ability to dig into more data helps unveil that. So as we get into the next slide, we're going to show what's really going on. So this is going to be a little complex, but the top chart shows rapid firing rates from a boiler, not from an air handler. Beneath that, it's helping us derive that we're seeing really inconsistent valve hunting, where the heating valves are going up and down. That's that red line. Again, squiggly is bad. This is leading to poor discharge air temperature control and system pressures, which finally has led to, at the very end, an inability to maintain proper pressures. And what it created was a site visit. And it wasn't a site visit where we went to air handlers or terminal units or anything like that. It was a site visit where we went right down to the boiler room. We went directly to the bypass valve attached to the boiler, and we noticed that the bypass valve was improperly sized, causing all of these downstream problems. And one of the coolest things about it is that nobody complained. There was not a single indicator from any tenant or anybody in the space that anything was going wrong. And the only indicator they would have had is probably 5-10 years down the road when they were having to replace components a lot more quickly than they thought they would have to on a brand new building. And Kelly, this is where I think it's really cool, because when we have the ability to link this into a digital twin, which we didn't have in this opportunity, that single site visit down at the bottom completely goes away. There is no site visit. That site visit is not necessary because we're able to view that valve through the digital twin. So in kind of the next component, we want to show what that kind of looks like. And so here we are at that same report, and we're investigating, and we can see that one is being brought up to us as being the main kind of poor performer. And we're looking at some pretty basic components around temperatures, pressures, basically the main things that you want to understand to determine whether or not your air handling unit is working properly. So as we find out the one that's improperly working, we can look for different things like the root cause, which is telling us about things that we might have a leaking cooling valve. And so how would I go about investigating this? Well, first I would have to verify this information through the data, which is going to populate here in a moment. And once we quickly validate through the data that we have a cooling valve that is closed and that we're still experiencing some decrease in the discharge air temperature across that coil, we can do something with it. And this is one of the most important things. We have to create an item that allows us to do action. Now, if we create an action item, we can include things like asset information, or more importantly, a link. And we can include links or ways to interoperate with a digital twin. So beyond just having the data representing what's going wrong, we can also refer to that digital twin to get all of the information that we would possibly need to deploy somebody out effectively and have them get that repair done right the first time. Whether that's going to be need to know what kind of valve it is or any of that type of information. And so if we were able to hop into a link through a digital twin, it would look something like this. We would walk into the mechanical room, and I see right away, I don't have one air handler. I got 5 or 6. So how do I know which one is the right one? Well, in the visual plan, I can refer to my as-built. I can refer to my documents. All my assets are laid out within this building. I can search the different layers of the documentation if I wanted to see piping diagrams versus things like the ductwork diagrams or information like that. And this is obviously very important because I'm sure many people that are listening to this have had times where somebody has gone up to repair something, they thought they did a great job, and then they found out it was the wrong one. We can also do things like what Kelly and I did the other day where, hey, what is the controller in there? Well, it's a reliable control. That saves me an email, that saves me a phone call. It saves me that general request for information that takes time away from my day. And so if we navigate into the air handler that I was concerned about, we can see some more details about it. We can see what type of air handler it is. I can see right away that it's a chilled water, hot water filled supplied system. I can look at things like the asset information, different dialog tags, and then I can see, more importantly, that chilled water valve, or at least the actuator controlling that chilled water valve. And if I want to have a closer look at it, I can zoom in on it. And one of the things that I think is cool about this is that, you know, I'm not a 6'5" technician. So a 6'5" technician might see this once and say, oh, you don't need any equipment. You don't need a ladder to repair that or anything like that. Well, me looking at this, I'd say, nope, I could probably do with a 3-foot step ladder here to be able to get to this. So instead of going up there, finding that out and then coming back, I'll know now. I can also attach all the information about the actuator or the valve or whatever it is I'm trying to repair, along with all the technical specifications information that I would need. So really, I don't have to go to this building. I don't have to go to this building until I have all of that information crossed off. And where it gets cool is that ability to kind of, I like to use the term nerd out, but you can start looking around and just start getting a better idea or understanding of the system. And this is where engineers will hugely benefit from this kind of stuff, because you're going to start following around and follow the chilled water pumps and find out where that chilled water piping is leading to, where the pumps are. You can even trace that even further and start trying to find locations about where that piping goes to. And it's the same thing with the pumps, where we can look at different asset tags, and everybody has had experience of trying to find good asset tag information. And again, if we kind of put ourselves in that shoes of somebody that is an engineer or somebody tasked with going into a building and where they say, hey, find a way to make it more efficient. Well, they're going to start off with a lot of questions, and those questions can be answered through these virtual tours and effectively allow them to start that project sooner and before a site visit happens, because it's going to be things like, what type of boilers do you have? Is it condensing? Is it this? Do you have a steam system? Do you have a water system? And instead of having to ask all those questions, they can just virtually go into the mechanical room and see it. Right here, we're seeing that this one has a frequency drive attached, and you can look at all the information about that. Maybe there's a possible way that they can benefit it even further. We can jump over to the chilled water system where we always find large opportunities for sustainability. And beyond just looking at the equipment, we can link in a video that shows you how that chiller is supposed to operate. And this is not information that's going to be limited or difficult to access for anybody. This is information that's right in front of your face. All you have to do is walk through the building and click on something to start really kind of learning and educating yourself a little bit about what's going on. When you kind of add all that stuff up together, it just creates a really cool project, because who's going to think a chiller sitting in the parking garage? I always think that's such a cool way to end this video, because yeah, even just this right here shows that benefit of, by the way, your chiller is going to be down in the parking garage, so that's where you want to go for that.
Well, you know what I like about this 3-minute or less video is that we've just replaced this entire process of an issue being reported. Instead of it being reported, you found it in the analytics, and you are now going to investigate, interrogate that data, rather than drive out to the site, go and search and find that asset, multiple rooms, opening doors, finding assets. Then now I have to call a manufacturer, I have to search online to find asset information. You know, what is involved with that field to finish process to replace what we've just shown in 3 minutes?
Well,
and then you start to take that and multiply it over a year. And how does that impact an organization? And then when you start to look at smart cities and bigger implementations, it's extremely huge, the impact here.
Absolutely, and that's where one of the questions I wanted to ask of Kelly Stewart is, you know, it's nobody complained about the issue that we saw at that building. Kelly, how many times do you think things go unnoticed just because there was nobody there to complain about it, or they didn't feel something?
Well, I can tell you. Sorry, wrong Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly.
Go ahead. No, exactly. The whole aspect of it being missed, especially from when you're looking at it from a risk perspective, or even just looking from safety and security. It's amazing that so much gets lost and so much gets avoided by not being able to see where it is and what you do with it. So I think it's invaluable in terms of what you're able to do and how you're able to do it and how more efficient you're able to be, as well as be able to assess it, detect it, and then, okay, let's resolve what we got to do before we even have to really go out there and do something with it. And it just goes, again, right back to that preparation and planning, and being more on top of what your organization does and how your organization operates.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. You know, and with the flooding that's happening currently here, you know, a lot of money was put into earthquake proofing buildings and all these other things, that not necessarily really looking at the water flow systems and looking at overburdened pumps. And, you know, we're looking at it now because they're failing and we have entire cities being flooded. But again, that information, that operational knowledge is critical, and the planning and the ability to work collaboratively on the master planning of that is really important.
And I just want to take a step, just think about it. Think back to Sandy, think back to Katrina with those levees and the way those things operated. If we had this technology back then and were able to do certain things in the planning stages of how things hit the shoreline, imagine how better prepared or better planned we could be. I mean, you see the models now when the storm comes in off the coast, that you see all the graphics and all the formulas as like, it's going to hit here and this is the probability it's going to be in. And then just think of that with regard to digital twin and the analytics involved now in order to do that type of an operation or that type of an assessment. It just gives you that much of information in order to make a proper decision and plan better for whatever outcome may happen.
Yeah, and like the analytics help us to better maintain information about our capital planning, so that we can look to decommission and replace assets and to make sure we're not going to have failing situations. And I think what we're seeing here in the Amsterdam area, the floods aren't over, by the way. They're back again. So it's you know, you have a compounding and multiplier effect. When some assets start to fail, it puts a strain on other assets. So again, I think, you know, what the Solomon Associates say for, 1% uptime, preventative maintenance saves you 10 times. I heard other people say 20 times savings, but there's no question. We all can talk about the fact that when you put oil in your car, you have less problems with it later, right? And if you have analytics and you have ways to manage your site and your assets, and if you have visualization with all your information to make that repair easier, then it's more practical that you're going to actually deploy and use it. So when we look at the case study done, again, with our partner Kickstart through the city of Coquitlam, you know, a site where trucks are rolling is $500. And we have 30 service providers for the city providing services. So what does that mean over a year? And you know, we're looking to reduce that site visit time, and that's internal too. That, you know, they have 100 buildings that they manage. So their facility operators have to internally go from building to building and to address problems. So what does it mean to reduce our site visits and our travel time and all this by 80% or something like that? That's significant, right? So let's talk a little bit about that ROI. Like, why do we go through the efforts, the diligence to document, the diligence to set up reporting and trending, and what does this mean to us? Why is it worth it to do this, Steve?
So, you know, I'm always reluctant to talk about ROI, savings and costs and stuff like that. Kelly, you've heard me talk about this a lot, where it's because I always look at it as being kind of a hindrance sometimes to just doing what the right thing is or the best thing. But I know how important it is. And I think that this industry has really gotten a mislabel around how expensive everything is. So I want to start off, I'll touch briefly just on this. Isn't Steve or anybody here saying this, but Berkeley Labs, who everybody knows is a well-respected organization, they found that from a blanket statement that they were able to experience 9% savings using FDD. And this isn't from one building, it's from 6,500 buildings, covering 567 million square feet. This is an excerpt pulled from the EMIS showcase provided by the Department of Energy, where they really wanted to try and push people towards the value of things like fault detection diagnostics. So that brings me into, well, yeah, it can save 9%. Well, how expensive is it? Well, advancements in technology have made it to where you can actually get $0 fault detection diagnostic integrated into your sites for no cost at all with software connections. A company like Resolute can connect your building and we can get data flowing and understand things without any type of upfront cost. And then the ongoing costs for these types of things have come way down from where it was in the past. An average size building could be less than $5 per day. If you're not including an operator to view the data, but just the cost of the data being available can be that inexpensive. So roughly a couple cups of coffee to have something viewing what's going on with your building 24/7, 365. And then in addition to that 9% energy savings, the real stuff I like is the extending asset life, saving the time saved diagnosing problems, saving communicating capital investments, and really all the communication ability. And then that ability for all stakeholders to have that sustainability oversight, because that's something that is touching every team now, where you're hearing those goals coming up, and we all have to take our part in trying to produce for them.
Absolutely. You know, and when we start to look at the smart cities and the failing pump station that we had in Abbotsford, this is the aftermath. This is what we're dealing with. Evacuations, completely destroyed houses. So it can be significant. And you know, hindsight's 2020, but pre-planning is critical, and be able to have visualization to provide evidence that we need to invest in something, or evidence that we need to plan a certain way, whether that be analytical visualization or whether it be, digital twins. It's a very powerful way to communicate our current state and what we need to do.
Well, and it creates a vision, I think, Kelly, for what Kelly Stewart mentioned around like the hurricane tracking. I think that's a compelling idea because, like you'd mentioned, they can start understanding where those storms are likely going to hit landfall. And nobody's ever going to be perfect and you can't check everything. But if you know that a storm is going to hit a certain area, then you could check your diagnostics to see the conditions of those pump stations. You could go into your visualization through Visual Plan and check the condition of those specific areas without having to make a bunch of trips and taking a bunch of time that you probably don't have when you have to make decisions really quickly. And I know that, it's the kind of dream scenario that we get to where these smart cities are the norm, but they would pay for themselves with the amount of revenue that they would save in disasters and just the impact that those types of things have on people's lives.
Absolutely. Kelly, talk to us about this pharma case study and what you've been doing here.
Well, so I wanted to, everything that from what you said is exactly right on point. And it goes into the whole aspect of just human beings in general. For this primary example, it's on patient health. How are things designed? What do they look like within the healthcare or pharmaceutical or health facility? Are they designed properly, and where does that go? Using the digital twin pieces, and we haven't gotten into the analytics yet, and we will. But at the infancy stages of this whole entire project, the design was changed because of what you could see and how you could see it, and what different variables you could use in terms of, okay, this would be a better proper or a more proper design based upon what we visually see without actually having to go to the facility. And it also gives you a retrospective look at, well, now I can take a step back and maybe take a few days and then go back to something, take a look at it again, and am I on target with what I'm designing? So there's a lot of implications in terms of what we discussed or what we've been discussing today in terms of what do those analytics do for us? What do those digital twin features do for us? How does that make our job more efficient, more effective, as well as allowing us to progress in the planning and preparation stages of whatever we're going to do? So for me as a security professional, when I'm advising on these things, it goes right to that impact. How does that impact the organization, and what they can do with those kind of analytics and data?
Absolutely. Steve, talk to me about your thoughts on, why don't we see such a pervasive use today with analytics when we see analytics and used in almost everything we do today?
Yeah, and that's really where I think that a lot of people don't even know that analytics is being used every day, and that's how things at large scale operate efficiently. So the examples I have on here are things like the companies like Facebook, Twitter. They had that large outage. Well, they rely on analytics to tell them what servers are starting to experience problems before they have a major outage like that. You're going to find things for stock control. And actually, I was going around the football game concessions, but due to Monday Night Football, it gave me a little change to this one. We see a lot more teams going for it on 4th and short these days. Well, that's not a result of a change in mindset. That's a result, and they're now using the data to drive their decision on a coaching decision for going for it on 4th down in a football game. And then one of the more nefarious ways that analytics are used is through stock market analysis, where those major companies out there are able to use huge server banks with tons of computing power to analyze millions of trades every second and determine which trade will make them money if they make it right then. So analytics is pervasive in all kinds of other industries. I just don't think people understand necessarily how it applies to the building space and where that value is. And the building space is typically just a very slow space to adopt any type of new technology.
I think there's probably a bit of an insecurity of how to read this data, and a lot of noise around the data, where your reports, it's red, orange, green. It's very simple to be able to at least visually address that there is an issue, pinpoint it, and then investigate further, or even get some help to investigate it further, right?
Yeah, correct. And you know what you also touched on, Kelly, I think another one of the blockers that you touched on earlier is that kind of fear from some of the old guard around, what is this going to expose? Is this going to make me look really bad? Is it going to do this or that? A little bit of fear of having all that stuff out there. So removing that is also a key component to kind of letting everybody know that truth, honesty, and data is important within your infrastructure.
Absolutely. So just a last slide for each of us, and we're just slightly over today, but great conversation. So for those in the audience that are looking to deploying at digital twins, when you look at some key benefits we discussed today, access, having 24/7 access to your visual information from anytime, anywhere is really, really valuable. reducing that touch point to facilities, whether it be from a service provider or from your existing staff. And whenever we look at the smart cities examples too, remote locations, many locations, or Fortune 500, that's a force multiplier. And reducing people from hazardous environments reduces the risk and the interruptions that come from that. And I think one of the things that the fundamental problem too is just a CAD drawing. How do we keep it current? How do we know that information there is accurate? And that's been such a challenge for so long to be able to do that effectively and to reduce data silos. So, and then thinking through, well, how do we take this data and make it operational? So it really is case study driven. It's really looking at the tools you currently use. And it's like, well, where do we operate today? What is the platform we want to be in? And how do we bring the other information into that ecosystem? So we don't really have to change the business operations as much in terms of how we function. We definitely want to be efficient, but we don't have to throw another tool on that someone has to relearn and force them to do a process that they're not comfortable with, right?
Exactly.
So Steve,
And
what
for
do you think from you?
yeah, for us, it's really it kind of starts with that single source of truth. Let's operate on the data rather than on rhetoric. We want to give time back to the teams, to the technicians. The technicians are swamped, and they're only going to get busier because now they're not only being tasked with applying comfort, but they also have to deal with sustainability and with indoor air quality. We want to provide constant commissioning of the building's functions. You always want to know what's happening and where when it's important. We want to provide the ability to manage with a lot more with a lot less, where you can effectively look at those 10 or 20 or 100 air handlers at once instead of going to each one individually. Easier knowledge transfer from seasoned techs down to new employees. An important part that we didn't really touch on too much today, but this is a very valuable training tool for in taking those long-term technicians in a building and not losing their brain power, not losing their building knowledge. You can keep them involved without them having to be there. We can do improved capital planning and validation success. When we can really show the cost of doing nothing to a building owner, that gives them a much more a better ability to greenlight a project. And then we can provide that contractor trip validation and site visit reductions to where we can make sure that we can view without having to talk to a contractor. Yep, you in fact did do the repair. I can see it right here from my phone or laptop or tablet. And then kind of finally, but I think it's really the most important component of the entire thing, is we want to harmonize all the systems with your people to ensure that the key goals of a building are being maintained correctly and without silos. So comfort, health, and sustainability all have to have as much of a share of the importance within a building, and one should not negatively impact the other. And so kind of finally, we can provide a lot of these things through the last kind of 3 abilities shown there on the left, which is we want to report. And you can go ahead and click there, Kelly. It should pop it up there. Then we want to validate. And then finally, we want to take action, because if we're not doing anything, then it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for attending today. And we did record it this time, so we will have a recording available and we'll post that both to our website and to YouTube, and we'll likely send out an email that everyone gets a copy of this afterwards. But thank you for attending, and we kind of ran out of time for questions today, but any of the questions in the window, we're going to send direct emails and maybe have a conversation afterwards. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.